The research that we did over the last year or so, as Lane was mentioning, we spent a lot of time with folks that can look at like regional maps, understanding the flooding zones, where water's coming in, how it collects. It's almost like a tub of where the water goes. We found through doing maps like this, if you look at all of the blue areas, in the future, this is where that flood inundation is going to start to happen. So we've been trying to find a way through different routes, different corridors, to be able to link from Village Creek all the way up through existing neighborhoods to get folks to be able to come up towards downtown. So while there might be one route that would come along Woodward Street to the north, the amount of intervention and change that would have to happen along the full length of that road versus trying to take existing routes out where you can mitigate things today versus much more extreme interventions, those different routes and these focus areas started to emerge as short-term, less expensive interventions that can happen now versus waiting for much major changes to ensure that we've got that corridor where everybody can get out. So it had nothing really to do with what's happening here. It's more to do about these red segments that can contribute towards an overall corridor to get folks out along the pathway.
You say we wouldn't drive that way.
Yes, well, if everything's been flooded and you're in a foot or two of water, that might be the only way to get out, is what we're saying too.
So you're expecting South Main to go here?
Parts of South, no.
No, South Main is not within the flood.
How do you normally drive?
Yeah.
Like if you're
So if you're in Harbor View or Shorefront Park, you're going to come out.
This is Woodward,
Okay,
yeah.
so this floods. I've walked through every hurricane. Woodward floods. So if you could get this far, you can leave your car here and walk in, but you're going to go over and you're going to try to get up towards Rubner Court to get to South Main to get to the train station.
That's right.
You're not going to go down. This is going downhill.
this is a pinch point where Meadow Street and Woodward come together.
So all these streets floods. I have photos, and
Yeah.
they've been passed around. I have photos of walking down those streets, right?
That's right.
Which is exactly where they're putting the new school.
That's right.
Also have pictures of that too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, understood. So trying to pick a path. So in order for that to work, all of this would have to be raised to be able to make that work so it doesn't flood today, versus taking this route during emergencies, during evacuation, to be able to have that secure route out. So
Okay.
the amount of red is the proposed raising
Above.
above.
just telling you from a psychological standpoint, after
That-
27 years in every single hurricane, you're going to head to the train station.
Gotcha.
Is the plan if you're going to raise to 9.5, if you propose 9.5 feet here, and I think when you were showing us a minute ago that had some street trees and a nice sidewalk, were you proposing narrowing the road and adding those amenities, or bumping out into some of the existing properties here?
I'll get that section back up here too.
The alignment of this road is approximately the same as what it would be. We're narrowing the travel lane, and that allows us to have a little bit more space. It may, this is high-level planning. The next step is to take this and, give it a little more look, and whether or not it does have to be expanded outside of the right-of-way a bit, maybe on that side to have a nice 3-to-1 slope, or maybe it's a more gentle slope with a green buffer on this side. So, at that point, they'll make those
But you'll see in the drawings
decisions.
here, as well as tonight, that we have down at the bottom the existing, where the street location is, really from the curb to the other curb. As Lorraine mentioned, everything that needs to kind of taper in to go from a couple feet high, gently sloping down to the sides, and still trying to leave room for front doors and access and those things. But yeah, that's a community conversation about where you taper those off versus having little retaining walls on each side. And we'll show you different applications throughout this corridor where we might have to have a couple of walls to be able to make it
How
happen.
does the storm drainage system work? Because if it's on you, like water's gonna be flowing.
So you'd still collect it at the curb line, and it would just have to, the manholes would have, and the catch basins would just raise and would connect into the existing
So there'd still
system
be-
that's down below. It's here already.
Be able to spread on the road. So how would that impact storm surge coming in?
Right.
How does that work because I'm just looking at that. Like if you have a road and a slant, that's directing a lot of water right into.
That's right. So the idea is the road is protected and the curbs on both sides to keep the water protected there, but then it would slope off, and yeah, other areas on each side might be flooded. Not about the road, about the water that's just coming up. Might be naturally flooded on both sides. Not from the road, but from the water coming up.
Well, yeah, but would the road impact or make it worse for the buildings.
Yeah, so the way that this road would then want to be designed is anything that's actually being collected with rain coming down onto the road, as Lorraine said, there'd be catch basins in here that'll be funneled into your water system and then distributed further down the road.
The same that it is now. You know, if your road is slightly sloped, you know, you catch it just before a driveway or, you know, some kind of connection. So the catch basins, you probably, as you walk around, you'll see that.
But the
That's
water is
the-
coming up through the storm drains. I mean, that's where it
Yeah,
starts on Water
that's right.
Street. It goes up through the storm drains, and until the tide goes out, it fills up. So it's got to go somewhere.
That's right. So during an event, we're also going to be talking tonight about this kind of toolkit of beyond the roads and the physical infrastructure. There are things like putting in backflow gate protectors at the stormwater. So if you have a 3-hour event, not letting the water come in and up through that stuff, but also having enough kind of capacity to be able, in the water system, to be able to hold that before it goes back out. So that's part of the whole thinking in the process from the stormwater.
Harbor
perspective.
View worked on that for the last 15 years. It's worth talking to them. They did duckbill ones.
Yep.
Some were successful, some weren't. But it's worth talking to them since that's what they deal with.
That's right.
But the more walls people put up and the more berms, when the water came up, it was less to drain. So a lot of the intervention has actually caused it to stick around longer.
That's right. So again, these are conceptual, but the idea is you got to start the conversation somewhere, try to figure out the priority locations, draw up some cartoon-looking drawings, so then you can actually figure out how much does it cost, where are the priorities, how do you get through some design development into consideration. So these would eventually spend probably 6 months to a year designing, funding, thinking about all those details to make sure the road operates to address those issues.
I think if this becomes like a viable alternative, then you're going to want to do you're going to want to think about how to upgrade the drainage infrastructure. And first of all, you'd want to model this and see how is it moving the drainage around, and then you would want to think about possible interventions in the drainage system, stormwater system, to upgrade it.
Capacity.
Increase the capacity. You can see this is a whole parking lot where there's water that's just running off, so you could think about things like this where you could do green infrastructure, or you could try to soak up more of the stormwater. So I think you'd have to think about that strategy if you were going to do a bunch of road elevations that are changing the drainage pattern, you know. So that's all got to happen as like the next step.
And as you can see here, look at the elevation up behind us, right? You can tell that's maybe a foot or two up higher. As we look behind me, you can see it's going down. So the idea of that 9.5 elevation, trying to have consistency so that we can have a strategy towards keeping that route secure and safe and you can evacuate. So as we go down this way, maybe we can start working to our next stop and talk about how this cross section here has to go up a little bit higher to maintain that 9.5.
You highlighted the parking lots. Are you highlighting that because it'd be less disruptive to do this street, or is there another?
What John just mentioned?
I think you mentioned
I did.
It's simpler. It's a simpler. There's less driveways to tie into.
Okay,
So it's less disruptive.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So for example, this is all like single family houses every 30 to 40 feet, all those little driveways versus, you know, trying to work with less, we call them curb cuts to be able to tie into.
No, I was just going to say, and that's part of what informed us as far as choosing Concord
Why you picked
versus
this street, right.
coming down the hill in Quintard taking a sharp left, you know, at Burritt. But those are all, you know, little homes, and you know, raising that up would be very difficult to be able to feather in and make that transition. But where there's no, you know, actually no physical buildings. The other thing I was going to say is you made an interesting point when talking about the capacity. I was thinking that when you raise up for the drainage systems, if you raise up the road a couple of feet, all these drainage systems now hold more water. You know, incrementally, but every little bit is going to be helpful. And I think that's sort of the approach for all of us for resiliency. Every little bit helps. So
I would say we'll continue the conversation, but why don't we get to our next stop? Lorraine, where are we headed to?
we're going to head this